Okay, we are on record.
All right, welcome everybody. I'm glad to see everybody, and I'm glad to see everybody could make it. I'll go ahead and ask John to kick us off, tell us what it is that he's looking for from the committee and how we could support him. And then we can talk about our processes for the committee. And then we can talk a little bit, or we could move on to the policies, and then try to wrap things up. How does that sound?
It's good to me.
Okay.
So the policy committee is a standing committee of the school board, and its function is to review and recommend ultimately policies for the board to adopt. It's probably one of the more important committees because the board functions on policy, as do we as administrators. There are several different ways that policies will come to the committee. Tonight, we're looking at some required policies that happen to be missing from our list of policies. There's only a few. There's 3 policies that are missing. Sometimes the administration will recommend a policy that might be already in existence to the policy committee for review or possible editing. And sometimes the committee members will want to bring forward a policy for review or editing if they see fit. The other thing that we should do is we should look at policies that are old policies that haven't been reviewed in a while, say back as far as 2009. If we've got some of those and we still have a few, we should probably look at those as well. And then lastly, as new required policies come forward, I'll bring those to the committee for their consideration. We pick our sample policies from either Maine School Management or Drummond and Woodson, preferably Maine School Management, because those are free sample policies that have already been vetted by their attorneys. And if we have to have Drummond and Woodson create something, we have to pay for it. So free is good.
Free is good. Yeah.
Yes, and
that's
they're
it.
top-notch attorneys, and they cost a
They're good attorneys, but they're expensive.
lot.
So that's it for me. We can talk about process. I know, Jason, you mentioned in your email about a particular process that you would like to use.
Yes, I would like to use Bartik and Patashnik's analysis process. It's an 8-step process. It's based on a research methodology. Basically, the medical model is sort of embedded in it. What's sweet about this process is that these guys are policymakers. They have been doing this stuff for years, and so their steps and their processes are based on what they found over the years as policy writers. And so this is the book that I'm thinking of. You can see it. And it's really dry, and I've read probably 2 or 3 or 4 of their editions. So if you want to go buy an older edition, that's fine. They basically state the same things. So what I do for my students is I outline the entire policy analysis process. And what I can do is develop a checklist. And the reason why I think that this is important is so that we have a sort of standardized analysis process that we can refer to. And when the other board members have questions for us, we can state that we used a standardized process to analyze our policies in the form of a checklist. And then we can go through and we can look at look at the checklist and make sure we haven't missed anything. Did we check and make sure that it was legal? Did we check and make sure that it didn't disadvantage anybody, and so forth? And I've said it in previous meetings that the very first step is, what problem are we trying to solve here? And so that would be like the very first step of the policy analysis process. If you're interested, we don't have to make a decision tonight, but if you're interested, I could go ahead and develop the checklist and I could send it along. And we could look at that in our next meeting. But tonight, as John said, that the policies that we need to look at are from the association, and I suspect that a lot of school districts are using these recommended policies. And as I said in my email, I went through with the Grammarly app, which is installed on my computer, and it works pretty well. So the recommendations are not the slight minor grammatical changes are not anything major, and I don't see that there are any real need to change the language in the policies. From what I read, I think that they're fine. But I don't know, John, if you want to look at those and maybe either choose to accept those changes or not. That's up to you. I don't know what the other committee members think about that process. I'm open to input. So I've got two things I've discussed: the process and the correction.
I looked at changes. I didn't see anything that was objectionable to me. And as far as your process, I mean, I've used something similar in research projects, when you're trying to go through and vet projects. I'm not familiar with this particular model, but that's fine if that's what the committee would like to do. I don't have any problem with it.
And I'll also add that there are plenty of videos on YouTube if you would like to, take a look at those. I particularly recommend Deborah Stein, who has made, I don't know, 3 or 4 videos on the process, and I think that they're very easy to follow. And it might be good to review those videos. I could actually put a list of those videos together if everybody would like, with the checklist, so you could look at the checklist and then follow along in the videos.
That sounds good to me.
It's tough for you.
Jason, can you kind of give us an elevator pitch of what the process is like, if you had to explain it in a minute?
Yeah, so it's a standardized process that these guys have been using, I don't know, for years and years. It was Eugene Bardick that first came up with it, and it sort of follows the medical model. And the basic medical model is to, ask a question, do a literature review, then an experiment, then you have your results and analysis, and then you publish your results and make recommendations or have peer review. So for example, in this process, step 1 would be to decide what the problem is, and then step 2 would be the literature review, and so forth. So there's I think step 4, for example, is like construct the alternative. So we have our policy. One alternative is always to not do anything. And then a second alternative might be something different. And then, so in our check sheet, we'd be able to have a space where we could write down the alternatives. So if another board member were to ask, then we could say that we considered all of the alternatives or the alternatives. And so obviously when you have a policy, there's always an option not to do anything. But unless you study policy, you might not know that that's an option. It might not come right to your head, when you're doing the analysis. And so I think this is a nice little procedure. It could be a nice procedure for us to use. I mean, some things might not apply. Like, for example, step 8 is to tell the story. What story are we going to tell to humanize this policy? Because, when you're doing policy analysis, most people identify with a story than they do the actual legalese of the policy.
Yeah, sure.
So we might try to expedite or I don't know, lessen that requirement on number 8, unless of course we feel that a story is necessary with the policy analysis. Does that answer your question, Paul?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I welcome structure, even if it is to fight against it occasionally. At least it's something to start us off right in the right direction. Yeah.
Yeah, good. So do you guys want me to develop a check sheet and send that out?
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Sounds good.
Let's give it a shot. If it works for us, awesome. If we need to tweak it, awesome. Whatever works.
Yeah.
All right, great. I like that. Yes, it's not in stone, so we can adjust it to meet our needs.
Yep.
Good.
Good.
In my email, I also mentioned time constraints. I don't feel that these meetings have really gone on that long in the past, but I do like to respect everybody's time. And usually when I meet with people, I try to keep it to an hour. I'm the kind of person that could talk all day long, so having that structure where we say, hey, it's been an hour and we're going to have to carry over what we didn't finish over to the next meeting. But I would like everybody's agreement on that, because I know there are some people that do not like to leave unfinished business unfinished.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yep.
I'm good.
All right. Excellent. Well, John, I think the next step would be to go ahead and jump right into the policies. Which one would you like to look at first?
Well, maybe we ought to start with ADF. That's the shortest policy. And policy ADF is a school district commitment to learning results. And I was a little surprised that we didn't have this one in the list of required policies, but we don't. All of our curriculum has learning results and the guiding principles already embedded in it. So this policy would simply codify what we already have adopted. It is a required policy, fairly straightforward, just stating that the board adopts main system of learning results, including the guiding principles. And that's in statute, state statute in Title 20A. I don't, unless you want me to, I wasn't going to read the whole policy to you. I think you can do that.
Do you want to screen share, John, or is that not possible?
Mark, do you have your policies up on your computer?
Jason.
Yes, I do. I can go ahead and
that's muscle memory, I guess, or something, some kind of memory.
Yeah.
So used to having Mark be the chair. Thanks.
All right, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So are there questions or comments?
Yeah, there are actually. I mean, I feel like this is absolutely front and center for what the school does. And so, obviously it should be there. The problem I've got with this is I'm not actually quite sure what the, how we assess the outcome. I think that, I mean, is it that we're supposed to look at the ASEA or NUIA data on the main state website and look for improvement every year? It doesn't sort of, it seems rather sort of kind of obvious as it's currently stated, and it doesn't sound very aspirational. Not that that's a problem, because it may not be serving that purpose here. I just wonder if, John, you can help me understand it a little.
So this is because this is a required policy, this is kind of the minimum that would be expected of a school system, right? So the part you're referring to is the bottom. Maybe you can go down to the bottom of this, Jason, the bottom paragraph right there. Superintendent will be responsible for implementing the system of learning results, including the development of appropriate administrative procedures. The board further directs the superintendent to report to the board annually regarding student achievement and progress toward implementing the learning results. So we do this fairly frequently. Stephanie, in her reports to the curriculum committee and then to the board, goes through our standardized assessment data, but we also have multiple measures that are used. Formative assessments in the classroom, more formal assessments in the classroom that aren't standardized assessments that we use to track student data. Plus, in terms of the guiding principles, we use things like the peer assessment or the HSA to look at students' areas of strength and students' areas of challenge and so forth. So that's part of our social and emotional learning. So this is something that we do really fairly frequently with the board, and that's report on student achievement. So there's no one thing that we do, but we collect data from multiple sources. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And so if we as a board, as a school system, aspire to improving the results over time, all things being equal, which of course they're not, that would not be a policy statement in its own right. That would be just a goal of the board. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Right. This is only to do with the fact that it's expected the superintendent report to the board, but not what the board expects in terms of student achievement.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Learning results have been around a long time as well. I'm trying to think when they first were introduced. It was back in the 90s when I was actually a classroom teacher, because I was on a committee that worked on the first draft. That's how old I am.
Okay, well, I mean, just for future reference, Lauren, you know, as we think about objectives for next year, since this year's objectives have already been defined, perhaps we can start to put some expectations around improvement in the learning results as one of our objectives, albeit, you know, contextualized appropriately.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. Also, John, I was talking to you recently about, like, you know, the amount of time we need to spend on math or science or whatever in classrooms. And I asked you, you know, are there strict rules on how much we do that? I think you said no, that it really, what matters is that we meet learning results and things like that, correct?
Well, you asked me if the DOE had like minute requirements on math, and they don't. They require that you have the system of learning results and guiding principles front and center, but beyond that, they don't give you, you know, hard and fast on time and all that. So we tend to embed lots of things in, you know, math, science, reading, social studies around social and emotional learning as well. So it's difficult to say exactly how many minutes each subject is taught, because they might be taught at different times during the day. They might be taught more than one time during the day, especially in the elementary. So
yeah, okay. Okay.
I'll give you a quick example, Lauren. When I was a classroom teacher, we did a math minute in the morning. We'd have a problem of the day.
Yeah.
So we do that problem first thing in the morning when everybody was, you know, well rested and sharp, and then we'd probably go on to language arts, and then maybe come back to mathematics class and go over the homework and the lesson from the day before, and then introduce new materials. So, you know, the elementary school is pretty fluid in that way.
Okay. Yep. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so if there aren't any questions, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask if the committee felt like this policy was good to go for first reading, or any recommended changes, or.
Yes, I was going to ask the same thing. So if everybody feels that this policy is good to go for the first reading, so we have 2 readings at this board, and if there are any comments, then we take the policy back and we revisit it. And then the final reading, the second reading, is the implementation of the policy, as far as I understand. So do we feel comfortable to present? Thank you, Lauren. Do we feel comfortable to present this to the board?
I do.
Yes.
Excellent. So we can go ahead and close this one out and move on to the next one.
Okay.
What would you like to look at next, John?
Let's see. How about if we tackle GCFBR, which is the recruiting and hiring of administrative staff administrative procedure. Now we have policy GCFB, but we were missing the procedure. And that also needs to be codified in policy.
Okay, is this the correct one?
Yep. That's it.
I'm going to blow it up a little bit. Can everybody see it?
Yeah. Yes, we can. Yeah.
Excellent. So I don't know if everybody read this on their own or if we need to take the time to look at it. Does anybody have a point at which they want to start in on this policy?
Whatever you want to do, Jason. What do you think is best?
Well, I read through the policy. I think it's a okay policy. It came from the association, so it is a template. You know, certainly we could make some changes, but I think for now, it's sufficient.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't have any issue with the sample policy. I think, you know, I think you nailed it, Jason, when you said it's sufficient. It's not the most exciting policy in the world, but it does give you a guide.
I'm afraid that's part of what we do. It's not very exciting, but we got to get it done.
Right.
So,
All right.
well, first of all, can I ask you, John, when you say it's not exciting, what is it that would make it exciting? And I mean, I'm not sure that we need excitement here either, but
I don't know. Maybe I picked the wrong word.
okay.
I don't know. I'm not.
The only thing I saw, I didn't see that was absent, perhaps, and I've seen it in my own prior life, was an increasing use of blind screening for the first iteration of you know, looking at resumes and so on, eliminating names and pictures and so on, so that there's no sort of racial bias and so on. I don't actually think it's needed. But I just want to alert you to the fact that that has become something of a practice in my old industry to, you know, eliminate a certain amount of bias from the selection process.
I think that's a good point.
All right.
That's a
where
really
was
good
that?
point. Yeah.
Paul, do you have a suggestion where we might?
I don't know. The problem is that this is for selecting entry-level analysts into Wall Street. And so you take out the name, and take out even sometimes the location and some other salient information, and all you've got are the raw data around the person's credentials, really, as the first point in the screening process. And I think that's kind of is pretty cool. And then the second step can, in many cases, involve just an online testing process to see how numerate and so on the person is without any sort of sense of their ethnicity or whatever. And I think that's a really good practice when you're dealing with, you know, hundreds and hundreds of resumes. But I just sense that it sort of over engineers the elimination of bias, which in this case is you know, it's just not needed. But I'm throwing it out there just so you know what that practice is and can maybe sense how it might be applied here, if at all.
What would you think of adding in under that screening process and one utilization of blind screening techniques?
When possible. I mean, it just may not be possible for whatever reason, you know.
When possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
What do others think?
I like it a lot. And if there's a way to add a sentence or whatever is needed to make that happen initially, that'd be great. And I think, you know, Paul makes a good point. It may not matter in some instances. We may not have a whole lot of people who are applicants, but that's a really good, in our world today and what we're trying to accomplish, that's a really good point.
I wish we had the problem of screening hundreds of applicants. I can tell you that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'd be grateful to screen one or two. But
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the commitment to the process, if it can be applied, I think shows the intent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a, you know, it's a commitment to equity in the process, right? But
Sure is. Yeah.
but as somebody who looks at who is committed to equity, but also looks at lots of applicants, and I have to say it's incredibly easy to be biased.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
So before you sort of all leap on this bandwagon, just if you could just double check me, because although I know that's how it was done at my firm, I don't know the details and I don't know what the legal parameters for doing it were and all that kind of stuff. I was, you know, twice removed from human resource practices, but I do know that that blind screening process, it may have been called something else,
Mm.
was conducted with vigor.
I mean, I think too, the other tricky thing is, and it may be what this actually applies to, right? Is when you live in a small community and you know people and you just are like, oh, nope, nope, right? Just by seeing their name.
Yes.
And so if there's a way, like, you know, whoever, if there's a committee, I mean, I don't know, John, how you do your process, but like if, you know, if there's any way to be able to first look at applicants without a name, do your first look through, and then, you know, at least that way, when you do put the names and the details to the work experience or the applications or whatever, you can at least check your bias that way. You know what I mean?
Right. No, I think that's a really good point, because, you know, I'm thinking of it when you said that. I know so many people in education.
Mm.
I mean, all over the state and other states as well. So I made a note, and I'll sort of take a look at that and see what, but I made a note and just said include blind screening techniques when applicable, I guess, for the moment, you know.
Okay, so do we want to have John go back and add that into the policy and then re-review that at a
Yeah.
subsequent meeting?
I think that'd be great. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Excellent. So we will table this policy to allow John the opportunity to reconstruct the language in the screening section.
All right.
Excellent.
Table and edit. The last one that I have tonight is a homeschooling participation in school programs, IHBGA. And this one, we do have a homeschooling policy as well, but this one goes into a lot more detail in terms of what the law requires school systems to do, what's admissible and what isn't. You know, and I think I think that many people don't quite understand that even if you're a homeschool student, you do have rights to access programming in the public school, to access materials. You can participate in a class if you want to. You can audit a class. You can get special education services. You can use materials. There are plenty of rights that homeschoolers have and can take advantage of. So I actually like the idea of putting this policy in our list of policies. And once we get it adopted, I'm actually going to put a link to it on our webpage so that it's easily found. And what I don't know. I'll just extemporize for a minute. So I think in conversations with some superintendents, they seem to be a little shy about homeschooling, almost like if you homeschool your child, it's not my responsibility anymore. And that's not my attitude at all. And the reason, because these people are taxpayers in the community. They have children who they're trying to educate, and I would more welcome them into our schools, even on a part-time basis. And I've seen homeschoolers, when you take that attitude, I've seen homeschoolers go from being totally homeschooled to actually coming into the public school. So I think this is a great policy to have, and I'll keep quiet.
Okay, so I assume this is in or based on state statute.
It is.
Yeah. And so we would have a policy that reflects statute and states the intention of RSU 13 at the same time, right?
Yeah, this would actually help my administrators as well. Because
I
it-
agree. Yeah,
Detailed.
I agree completely. I agree with everything you said in terms of taxpayers and being able to participate in programming where they can. And we should have a very, very clear, very clear policy. Obviously, that reflects statute, but just very clear as the intent of RSU13, homeschooling and what we offer.
Well, the administrators call me up a lot with questions about homeschooling, and
Yeah, I
so
bet.
this would be real helpful.
John, is there anything that you would like to add to the policy or take away from the policy, or do you agree with it in its entirety? And I ask that because I know it's a template.
Yeah, I went through it and I didn't see anything that I would try to take away, simply because I think I would be a little cautious about taking anything away. I'm not entirely certain about adding something. Although, I think, well, I don't think I would add something to the policy, but I think once it gets adopted, I'd like to add a little, a paragraph or so about the district's philosophy about homeschooling, which is my philosophy about homeschooling, just because I really want parents to know that we want to welcome them to, to come into the school, have their kids take a class, whatever they'd like to do. And that's very possible. A lot of parents don't know this either.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't want to add anything to the policy necessarily, but like I said, I'd like to add a little statement of our philosophy when we actually post it.
Okay. That
Excellent.
sounds good to me.
Are there any other questions or comments on this? Or, I mean, it's a little bit of a big policy as compared to the other ones. Do we need more time with this policy?
I got to say, that's really, in my opinion, up to John, because, he's got to make this work with his principals and everybody else. And John, in my opinion, if you feel comfortable, this is a great start, and we may tweak over time. But this is a really solid start that you feel comfortable to post and to describe to people through our webpage. I think that's great.
I don't think there's any harm in bringing it to the board for first reading and see if the board in general has questions or thoughts around it. And then we could sort of go from there, because we can always bring it back.
Okay.
Can I just introduce this sort of half-baked question here, which is around vaccination? And do we require our children to be vaccinated, or did we require our children to be vaccinated to attend school? I think not, but I just want to ask the question.
The state of Maine requires certain vaccinations in order for children to enroll in school.
And so if the child is homeschooled and has not been vaccinated as mandated, what's the procedure there?
In order to come into the buildings on a regular basis, they would have to meet the vaccination requirements.
That's
How
covered.
about
in
play
this statement.
soccer, for instance?
Yes.
Oh, you
Interesting.
would ask me that one.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and look at the Title 20 vaccination law to tell you the answer to that one.
Yeah.
So-
I think the answer is yes, but I'm not 100% positive.
Okay, so we don't want to exclude any children. However, there is a legal mandate that must be met, and that's not in this policy statement because it doesn't need to be. Is
That's
that correct?
correct. Yeah, and we do have a policy around that. And don't ask me what it is. I'd have to go back and look.
Okay.
But it's in
And
Title.
Paul, to be clear, the statute or our directions do not include COVID vaccine. And so that may be interesting to watch if that gets taken up in Augusta.
Okay.
And transmitted to us.
The relatively recently, the state actually tightened up the laws around vaccination for school-aged children. It used to be that you could claim a religious exemption. And now you can't do that. So the state of Maine has really sort of toughened the laws around vaccination.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
actually,
didn't we vote on it like 3 or 4 years ago? As a
Yeah.
referendum.
yeah. that
Was it a
came up.
referendum? Oh,
I
okay.
think so, yeah, it came up. And I've actually, so every year, it's just an aside, but every year the school nurses will forward to me a list. Usually it's a very small list of kids whose families haven't complied with the vaccination statute, and I have to send them a letter and all that. And the worst case scenario is, in some extreme cases, we've actually had to unenroll kids, believe it or not. And I
That's
have
actually-
no choice in the matter.
That's happened at the university level also.
Yep.
We give them every opportunity that we possibly can to comply, and then have to follow the law.
Yep. Okay.
Should we anticipate that question when we present this to the board?
I'll do some
Yes.
homework. I'll do some homework.
Yes.
on that
You're right,
before
Jason.
I come to that meeting.
Definitely anticipate those questions. Yeah. But I like the idea, like, yeah, let's bring it to first reading, and we might have a debate, maybe a lively debate. And then of course we as a committee can take back whatever we think comes out of that, figure out what to do.
Excellent. So are we all in agreement to present this policy for the first reading?
Yes,
All right.
I am.
Everybody looks like they're saying yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Yep.
So we're going to present ADF and then, of course, this policy for first reading for the next board meeting
Mhm.
in January.
Sounds good.
Excellent.
Great.
Go ahead. Somebody said something. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
All good.
All right. great.
Jason, are you thinking that, well, I guess my first question is, how often does this group meet?
Once a month.
And do you think you'll have the summary checklist of the who's the, what's it, policy, whatever, but by the next meeting?
Oh, yeah. I think it'll take
Okay.
me a few minutes to write that up.
Okay.
Because like I said, I already have an outline. All I got to do is just go through and make it into a checklist.
Okay, and you'll include the videos from Deb, whatever her name is.
Deborah Stein, yeah, I will be
Yeah.
happy to do that. Yep,
Great.
good.
I'm terrible with names. So.
No, it's fine. You know, I do this stuff, so I can do it. But yes, I'll be happy to
Okay.
do that, and I'll get that out to everybody probably within a week or so.
Okay.
All right. Feel
Sounds
free to
great.
reach out to me if you need anything. Does anybody else have anything to say? I thought I heard somebody.
Thank you, Jason, for doing all of this sort of pre-work for us. Made it a lot easier. Appreciate
Oh,
it.
certainly. Thank you for your support. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah. No, good job, Jason. Very good job.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. I look forward to our next meeting, and I will go ahead and adjourn. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Great.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.